Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode If You Could Hide to Cola podcast. My name's Daniel. This is my brother Clive.
Hello, everybody. Yes, welcome. Daniel, I found this episode not hard to study for, but it was very emotional. Like, you know the story, you know what's going to happen at the end, but I read the story in a lot of different people's perspective. So for the quote today, I thought I'd find something very positive and uplifting. Yeah, I'll read the quote today. It's from one of my favorite books of all time called Odds Are You're Going to Be Exalted. And I'll just read a little snippet here. It says,
Who's the author of that,
the
Clive? Who's the
author of
author
this,
of that
it's
book?
Alonzo L. Gaskill,
Shout out to Alonso.
and I'm sure I've definitely said that correctly. But it's a great book. But it's all about just knowing what the Savior said. If you choose the right, you will be exalted, and it's a really fantastic book. I just gave it away, but there's many pages, so there's more to it. But let me read this.
Spoiler alert. Don't worry about buying it now.
All right, so I'll read this bit. It says, "It is true that in mortality, only a relative few will find and accept the gospel, and, as Lehi's vision suggests, all who are baptized will not necessarily reach the prize. But if you are a faithful member of the church who has willingly set aside the enticements of the fallen world to enter into covenant that you are striving to keep, then odds are you're going to realize the promises made to you and you will be exalted." Sometimes it feels like a difficult task saying that I will be exalted, but really, like this is there, keep your commandments, and it's that easy, really.
Clive, I also found it a little bit challenging to study for this episode. It does have a high emotion. And I also thought about a commentary that we've had before when we were talking about the creation. That is, where does the creation start? Where does the martyrdom of Joseph Smith start? At what point does this begin? I mean, you could go back to the Missouri days. Certainly, that had a huge influence in this. Joseph Smith was troubled by people who didn't like him. This is the stuff he was dealt with. This is the stuff he was dealing with his whole life, I should say. And so, at what point does this start? And there's some people out there who know this history really well, and I think we'll tell it today as best as we know. It is quite a big moment in our history. People like John Taylor, who we'll talk about today, was in the Carthage jail when it happened. He would carry resentment of this for his whole life, and I'm imagining we'll get to this, but when Porter Rockwell rides through the streets of Nauvoo, telling people that the prophet was dead, you can just imagine the emotion that this brings. When you really deep dive into to this part of our history.
Yeah, it is difficult. We're reading the Doctrine and Covenants as a family at the moment, and the kids, we're not quite up to this part yet, but the kids were asking what happens at the end. Like, well, I said, well, the church is as it is now. And they said, what happens to Joseph Smith? And I said, well, he dies at the end. And they're like, what? Like, okay, sorry, spoiler alert. They're shocked.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, this is a movie where the good guy died, and let's talk about that today. I'm not sure where to start, but place to start is a newspaper called the Nauvoo Expositor, and this was a one and done type situation. This Nauvoo Expositor is a newspaper that prints an article once. And in the article, it absolutely tears Joseph Smith to shreds. This happens in June, I think, of 1844. It's very inflammatory against the prophet, and so the Nauvoo committee, which of course includes Joseph Smith, get together and they decide that based on their laws, it was legal to destroy this press because the newspaper has caused unrest. It's caused enough inflammation in the community that it's legal to not have it anymore. And so they go and destroy the press. And this is the chain of events that would set off the ultimate martyrdom of Joseph Smith. Those who are keen listeners will say, well, hang on a second. What about when William W. Phelps's press was ripped from the top floor and destroyed in the Missouri days? Well, no one was ever tried for that. No one was ever punished for this action. Although then when the Mormons do it, it would result in 2 of their leaders' death. So this is probably the start, but there's so much more that led up to this. So I guess that's what I mean by where does this begin?
Yeah, when we were doing the Book of Mormon, we were, I was saying to you, like, I think it was Easter actually, where do we start with this? Because Christ was always the plan to take on our sins and die the way he did. And yeah, it was the same with me. Like, where do you start with this? And I started at that paper that was destroyed because, yeah, I think for me it was we have so much revelation and so much happening between. Like last week or maybe it was the week before, where you were trying to fill us all in about what happened between these 2 sections, because it's not written in the Doctrine and Covenants. It just skips a few years. So yeah, for me, I think, okay, well, maybe this is the start of it. But like you said, yeah, there's just so much to it. And yeah, isn't it funny that Joseph Smith said something that people disagreed with at a time when there was religious excitement all across the country and everybody had opposing opinions? But it just shows that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was the truth, because Satan tried so hard to stop it, even until Joseph's very last moments.
Absolutely. I guess, Clive, I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but I thought I would just give a very quick brief on what led to the Nauvoo expositor being created and the ultimate murder and martyrdom of Joseph and Hyrum. And that is where all issues lie, and that is with politics. So much of this had to do with politics. The saints, there's thousands of them, right? There's thousands and thousands of them. And like in Missouri, where there was a fight at a polling booth because one political person thought the Saints were all going to vote for them, then they weren't. So then they wanted to stop the Saints from voting, and then there was false reports that the people were murdered at the polling booth. It never happened. Similar case here. There's 2 main parties. There's the Democrats, and then there's another party called the Whigs. WHIG, Whigs. There's 2 parties. And the Saints really flip on both parties. They're mainly a Democrat voting group of people, but they also at times support the Whigs. The governor of Illinois is a Democrat, but there's a Whig, and they're all interested in the Mormon settlers. Why? Well, because there's so many of them. There's just so many of them. Nauvoo becomes such a big place that there is even an idea that the county seat should be taken from Carthage to Nauvoo, because Nauvoo is where everything's happening. At this stage, there's a university, there's schools, there's industry, there's churches, their temple is being built. And when, they're right on the Mississippi. And so, of course, when visitors are coming, where are they going? Well, they're going to Nauvoo. They're going to the biggest city around. And so the people in Carthage don't like that. They're a bit jealous of the people in Nauvoo. The politicians aren't super stoked because the Saints are Democratic, then they're Whig. In the election in the end of 1843, in fact, Joseph would say, well, I'm going to vote Whig, and Hyrum says, well, I'm going to vote Democrat. In the end, the Saints, 3,000 Saints vote for the Democrats. So the Saints have a huge sway on the political party. From this point on, Clive, the Whigs actively seek the downfall of the Mormons. They are sure that the Mormons will have them voted in. And at this point, they are highly active. They are highly engaged in gathering groups of people, and they are seeking to bring about the expulsion like what happened in Missouri. They want that happen. They want that to happen in Illinois, and they are. It reminds me, Clive, of that section in Matthew in the New Testament where the chief scribes all get together and they say, "We believe this Jesus Christ just raised Lazarus from the dead. We've just seen it. We now need him to die because we've seen it for ourselves. And if everyone finds out, we're in trouble." I feel like it's almost similar in this case that the saints are voting in these big blocks and they're choosing basically who's going to be the governor. And so the Whigs aren't stoked at all, and they really plot for the downfall of the members.
So, Daniel, this printing press that was destroyed, obviously this all links together in some kind of way. Do we know, is this what kicked it off? Is it, the Mormons hate the Democrats? Like, how did that all get down? Do we know what was actually printed for, for it to be such a big uproar?
Yes, we do. And it's the Whigs and the Democrats that allow a Nauvoo city charter to be created. They agree and approve it. So the Saints, there's so many of them, right? The Nauvoo Legion is the largest militia. It's bigger than the state militia, I'm sure. I'm sure I've read it's bigger than the state militia. So the Mormons have this enormous capacity. And so they are approved to write their own charter, their own laws. And so in these bylaws, they say, well, if anyone has a newspaper and it's going to cause a fuss, well, it's legal for us in our charter to take it down. And this is approved by both of these parties in Nauvoo. And so that's really what gives them the power, the authority to take the press down. Later on, people will debate a lot. Well, was it actually legal or was it illegal? But at the time, the Joseph, of course, who's running things, he's a part of that, and this newspaper's just ripped him and the church to shreds. They agree. Okay, well, yep, it's legal based on our charter. It's legal to destroy that press. And so that's kind of the building up for it. The press is destroyed, and this stage, the Whigs truly, truly hate the prophet.
It's odd, isn't it? Like you said before, like our printing press was destroyed, and you don't hear that those people were arrested and now there's no more mob. It's very much one-sided when it comes to what the Mormons can do versus what the non-Mormons can do. They can go and destroy houses, hurt a lot of people, destroy printing presses, steal documents. But when we do something that goes completely against us, that's it. Now's their chance to really jump on it. It seems like it was very one-sided.
Absolutely. I guess in these days, you would call the Mormons a minority. They're a minority group. They're, I don't know what the term would be, not racist, there's something else, but they're a minority, and they're a very deeply hated, there's a couple of books at this stage that have been released that are about, that are anti-Mormon literature. There's a couple of them now floating around. And part of it is William Law, John Bennett, William Law. He's part of the First Presidency. He's got a huge part in the downfall of Joseph. I don't know if he's actually anything to do with the martyrdom, but he was certainly a big part of the rhetoric of how bad of a person Joseph Smith was. It's just really he goes from being in the First Presidency to immediately telling everyone how much of a bad person Joseph was and these bad things that are happening in the church. So yeah, they are absolutely a minority that is picked on, abused. They've got no rights at all. It wasn't just too long ago. The people who are living through this have lived through Horns Mill. I think about there's a 10-year-old boy who is injured, and at Horns Mill there was a gun put directly to his head, and he was shot in the head. And they said there's just another dead Mormon. The people who are living in Nauvoo literally have experienced this. Their friends have died. They themselves have had their houses burnt, pulled over. Women are raped, beaten. So they're absolutely in the throes of it. And there's a little bit of there's a sense of being frightened as well, Clive. They're frightened that what happened, the Mormon expulsion of Missouri with Governor Boggs, is absolutely going to happen to them again in Illinois. That's what they're frightened of. They're so worried that this is going to happen to them again, and at any moment it's going to be legal for the guy down the road to come and just set fire to their house and kill them. So they are certainly on edge. They're certainly on eggshells at this point in time as we get deeper into 1844.
All right, so you mentioned that it was pretty much legal what they did because of what happened. So the Latter-day Saints went and they destroyed the printing press, but it was in fact legal. So when they did go to court, I know for at least the first time it was discharged, right? And on that basis.
Yeah, that's right. So they go. Essentially, Joseph's arrested, and they go and they say, I must say two things. First of all, someone who's listening to this that is anti the church would argue that what we've claimed about that destroying the printer press is legal. Yeah, of course, people are arguing that it was illegal. I don't know if too many people care about it nowadays, but certainly over time, people say, well, actually, it was illegal. So there's for and against. And then secondly, yeah, so he goes to a court, but the court is I would call it a friendly. It's not a court in the middle of Missouri where people hate him and every single person is going to judge against him. This is a friendly court, and they say, well, of course you've acted on good grounds. There's no problems here. You're free to go.
Right. And so the next time they went to court, they went to, well, I mean, what I was reading in, what is this book called? I was reading this all today, The Restored Church. It was talking about how they went to a non-Mormon, as they called it, a non-Mormon judge the second time to go and, obviously not the Latter-day Saints, but there's others to go and plead their case to a non-Mormon, hoping that they would be more on their side and then imprison Joseph Smith and company.
Yeah, that's right. He doesn't go to court again immediately. Essentially, what happens is from this, the mob, the people from Carthage, these all basically double down their hatred for Joseph, and they really double down and say, okay, well, we're going to take this guy down. And so Joseph readies the Nauvoo Legion because he's worried that people are going to come and storm Nauvoo, and bad things are going to happen to the town. So he readies the Nauvoo Legion, and that is a critical piece of information, because later on someone would say, well, when he was at Carthage, why didn't he just call the Nauvoo Legion? They would have broken him out there in 2 seconds. Of course. I don't know if it's John Taylor or Willard Richards, but they say to Joseph while they're in Carthage, they say, hey, Joseph, give me 5 hours and I'll get you out of here. And Joseph says, no, we're not going to do that. But of course, he's talking about the Nauvoo Legion. Just go get him. Tell him to come here. No one's going to be able to beat the Legion. So anyway, he readies the Nauvoo Legion. Nothing really happens there.
This is the second time that he was released. They wanted to arrest him again, right? But so, like you said, he goes into hiding, which from everything that we've talked about so far, that's not too far-fetched. Like every time the Saints get like people against them, they have to pick up and leave. So this wasn't just something on a whim. Joseph's like, well, I'm going to go hide now. It's not like that at all, which unfortunately that's the way I always understood it, because I feel like it was always a rushed story, that part. But so Joseph, Hyrum, Willard Richards, they're going out and they're packing up their suitcases. They're going to move to the Great Basin in the Rocky Mountains. Right? This is where that all comes in, because they know they're getting called again to a different judge, knowing that that's really going to be the last time. Joseph knows that if he does go to trial again this time, he's not going to get out of it.
Yeah, that's right. So there's this famous story where Porter Rockwell is rowing a boat, and Joseph, it's a leaky boat, and Joseph and co have to kind of I think they use their shoe to bail water out of this boat that's sinking, essentially. But yeah, they're looking at where else to go. But this is common. Brigham Young would later, he would say that Joseph always said we're going to be in the Rockies. But at this stage, Joseph had sent people out to like Texas, Iowa. There's 4 or 5 places, California. Joseph had sent people out to try and um, do a bit of recon about where the Saints were all going to pick up and move from.
Well, yeah, you mentioned Porter Rockwell. Porter Rockwell was meant to go out and bring them horses so they could ride the rest of the way. But when Porter Rockwell came back, he came back with Reynold Calhoun. And Reynold Calhoun came with these letters. And there was, weren't very good letters. They were from members of the church calling him a coward for running away. He gets a letter from Emma pleading for him to come and face a trial. And we don't know the exact parts of the letters, but I'm sure it wasn't just her saying whatever you're doing is wrong. I'm sure it was all above board, and and even Cahoon likened Joseph to a shepherd who left his flock to wolves. So everyone around him, really, it was a very negative situation. So Joseph said, "If my life is of no value to my friends, it is of none to myself." And that's when he gave himself up to go with them.
He talks to Hyrum and he says, "Hyrum, you're my older brother. What should we do?" And I think Hyrum says, "I'll follow you. I'll follow you wherever we need to go." In I can imagine it's a highly emotionally charged conversation with those two brothers where Joseph is saying, "This is it. We're going to go. This is the last thing we're going to do." So they head back. The next morning they ride, and there's a sort of famous memory or story of where they're riding up, and at sunset they see the temples being built. They see the town of Nauvoo being really industrious, and this is the last time that Joseph would see this. And I'd imagine it's very, very emotional for him. And they turn and they head towards Carthage.
Yeah. So after the trial's in Nauvoo, I believe, and that's why it's really, all of his enemies are around him. So it doesn't really have any friends there because of the situation that he's in.
The trial is in Carthage. The first court case is in Nauvoo, where he's tried for the printing press. Then they go to Carthage. And they go to Carthage because Governor Ford says, "Guys, just come here. I will make sure you're safe. You need to come here. We need to calm this down. You guys need to appear before the court, and I will ensure your safety." And that's so then based on that recommendation, they head out.
I've got here about 4 miles west of Carthage, they were met by a company of 60 mounted militia under Captain Dunn. And it was at this time when Joseph says that famous line, "I am going like a lamb to the slaughter, but I am calm as a summer's morning. I have a conscience void of offense towards God and towards all men. I shall die innocent, and it shall yet be said of me, he was murdered in cold blood." So, he just knows. He just knows that this is the end, even though it's meant to be all legal, all above board. They're meant to go see these proper judges. Even in the prisons, there's more than just the four that we know about. And each one, a few of them are let out at different times for different reasons. So,
Yeah.
but, he just knew that this was it for him.
So they go to court and they post bail. They post bail of $500 and they get out straight away, basically straight away. And the idea that they've got is that Governor Ford is going to protect them and they'll post bail and they'll be good to go. So they post bail, they walk out, and they're arrested again on charges of treason. And this time, the charges of treason are linked to the Nauvoo Legion that I was mentioning before. The charge is essentially that Joseph has this, he's the leader, he's this commander of this army, and he readied it in defense that he was going to take down any state or federal troops that tried to arrest him or that tried to come for him. And therefore, this is a treason. And so this is what he's arrested for. And now this is the point where he's 100% out of any control. He going to his first trial and posting bail, he's got the money. It's $500, it's a lot of money. But he this is not in a lot of control, but it's still in some control. The second arrest, he's now completely out of control, and he now ends up in Carthage jail.
So The morning of the martyrdom, Hyrum Smith was reading Ether, and he was reading Ether chapter 12, and specifically verse 36 and 38. Now, what's interesting about this is Moroni's farewell that he's reading, and I'll quickly find it here. And it came to pass that I prayed unto the Lord that he would give unto the Gentiles grace that they might have charity. And it came to pass that the Lord said unto me, if they have not had charity, it mattereth not unto thee. Thou hast been faithful. Wherefore thy garments should be made clean. It does go on a bit more. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but essentially it works so well with everything that they're going through. Like, yes, these things are happening, but as long as you know that you're prepared, and that's how Moroni sort of ended when he was reading or translating the book of Ether. So really, really interesting there. John Taylor sang sang the song "The Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief" on the last day as well. So it wasn't a panic and a what should we do next. It was very much they kept to character. Really, is the best way to say. I think is they didn't change their way. They continued to read the scriptures. They sang together. They prayed together. Really, on their very last day.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. It's so right. And Hyrum asks John Taylor to sing this song again. It's 7 verses long, and Hyrum says, can you sing it again? And John Taylor says that he doesn't really want to. And Hyrum says, well, it might help us, might help lift our spirits. So John Taylor does. And then they go and they get wine, actually. They get a bottle of wine and they share that as well, which might be strange for people to hear now. The church was using wine until the late 1800s, or maybe even 1900. They were using it in their sacrament.
Yeah, we talked about how it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't a commandment. Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
So they get a bottle of wine, and they all have a quarter of a cup or something. However much 4 people can share one bottle, not very much. Yeah, they're at a point where John Taylor, he reports that he looks out, they hear a fuss. They hear a fuss breaking out. And John Taylor reports that he looked out and he saw these people had put black ash and soot and mud on their faces. And these are these people that we hear called the Carthage Greys. These are these people. During the day, the Joseph's lawyer would still be trying to argue to let him out. He says, the Carthage Greys are here. Like my clients essentially are not safe in this prison. Of course, he's never successful in getting them let out. Other people are let out, like we've talked about, but certainly Joseph was never going to be let out. So they're at a door. They're not in the prison, and this is people who aren't aware of the story. Carthage jail has jail cells, but it has a bedroom on the top floor, and this is where the saints are. They're not kept in a prison, and this is, this story has so many levels of just how on earth does this happen. But this wild, wild west, they're held in jail under, not good charges, and the people who are holding them know that they don't even need to put them in a prison cell. They're kept in a room, a bedroom. So they start coming up the stairs, and Willard Richards is a big dude. He's quite a large gentleman, and he holds the door still. And they go to open the door, and they realize they can't open the door. They assume it's locked, so they put the butt of their gun against the lock and they shoot. And that kind of hits Hyrum, and then they shoot again through the door, and that hits Hyrum on the left side of his nose, and he gets shot in the head. So he says, "I'm a dead man." He says, "I am dead," or "I'm a dead man," and he falls to the ground, and that must have just been a horrendous scene. A man shot in the head, now lying on the ground down here next to you, bleeding and all kinds of carrion, would have been just horrendous.
Well, you imagine the scene of no locks on the doors. Willard Richards, as you said, and Joseph were trying to hold the door. Hyrum takes a couple of steps back and gets shot in the face. He says, "I am a dead man," holding his face, and falls to the ground. And Joseph runs over to him and says, "Oh, dear brother Hyrum." And he immediately held on to him at that time. all still while the mob's trying to get through the door and the door's being held.
Yeah.
So just such a sad situation. Joseph grabs a pistol and starts shooting out of the door and missing most of the time. All the while, the door's trying to be held and there's gunfire. Willard Richards, a year before that happened, Joseph gave him or prophesied something that would happen to him. He said, the time would come when the balls would fly around him like hail. And you gotta remember, this is what was in pistols back then, were just pellets, just balls of steel. And he should see his friends fall on the right and on the left, but that there should not be a hole in his garment. And so that was a year before this happened. So you imagine Joseph, Hiram's down on the ground, Joseph's over his body, and Willard Richards holding the door, shots being fired, and he doesn't get hit. He manages not to get hit.
And he's a big dude. He's covering a lot of the door.
Yeah. So just a great prophecy right there at the end for Willard Richards.
And Willard Richards would go on to continue to be a fantastic servant for the church.
So John Taylor, he says that he was struck 3 times. One time in the side, and he said that there was a hole so big it was like a man's fist. He got shot in the watch, which a lot of people think he was shot in the watch that saved his life, but he even said himself that it didn't. He said, one ball struck me on the left thigh, which inflicted a very serious wound. Another struck my watch and smashed it into pieces. This, I think, must have been after I fell on the floor. The watch was in my vest pocket. It was reported that the ball struck my watch, saved my life, but by preventing it from hitting my body, but this was not so. The ball had struck the windowsill before it reached me and was consequently somewhat spent. It struck my watch a little on one side and was diverted from its course. It's interesting that, right, to me, because all of this going on, and he's so detailed about the specifics about where these bullets are flying. Like I couldn't do it. I would just be, but he does. It gets hit, rolls on the floor, and rolls under the bed, and to protect himself.
He one of the shots, I don't know if you just mentioned that, actually goes into his leg and is in the back of his knee forever. For his whole life, the bullet is lodged in the back of his knee forever. He lives with this cane and this limp forever, always, every day, living this absolute nightmare of a time.
So while this is so, I mean, you've got to try and imagine the story as these things go on, that all of these men have different things happening to them. It's not just they were all gathered together and they were shot. So Joseph, he backs up from the door after he's taken his pistol and shot through the door, and a couple of hit, but no casualties from him, I believe. But there was,
yeah, I'm not sure if he actually shoots anyone. He has 6 bullets. He kind of puts his gun out the door, shoots it 3 times. It doesn't fire anymore, so he just gives up on it. Whether he shoots someone, I'm not sure if there's any records about him actually hitting anyone. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
whether it did or didn't doesn't matter to me.
It doesesn't matter. So he steps back. Willard Richards has a cane, and he's hitting the tops of the guns down, and to try and deflect them all. Joseph goes to the window, and this is where he's shot. And his last words were, "Oh Lord, my God." Now, there's no evidence for this, but Joseph Smith was a Mason, right? And the Masonic cry for help is, "Oh Lord, my God, is there no help for the widow's son?" So if that was, maybe that what he was trying to do to show those that may have also been Masons, to say, this is my cry for help, or maybe he just did cry out for the Lord. But this is where he was shot. He fell out the window, and now there's conflicting stories about what happened here, Daniel, and there's no real evidence for these stories. Just this one man named William M. Daniels. He said that when Joseph fell out the window, he crawled to the well that was right near the jail, crawled his body up on it. A man came to him with a knife, and a beam of light shone from the heavens, and this man froze in place. And a lot of the mobsters around were too frightened then to go near Joseph when he finally died. Like I said, that was just William M. Daniels' story, but everyone else's story is when when he was shot and he fell out the window. That's when he had died.
Yeah, so he gets shot, he falls out, and I've actually got, Clive, I don't know if you can see it too well here, but this is a Sunday school manual from 1916. And in it, it teaches a couple of false doctrines, but one of them is what you just mentioned. It teaches in there that, so the backstory is that there's people from California who will say that they will pay gold for the head of Joseph Smith. And so this story, someone runs to Joseph to actually behead him, and this light comes down, and this guy or these people freeze like stone. And of course, like you said, the story just isn't true. Joseph's body falls to the ground, and from what I understand, there's a bit of a scuffle, and the people immediately flee.
So when Joseph falls out the window, they say Joseph is out of the window. So the men that were upstairs, they ran back downstairs and ran outside. Willard Richards then helps John Taylor up from under the bed, takes him to
Yeah.
one of the cells and puts him in one of the beds.
Later, John Taylor would recall that story, and I'll read out exactly what he says. So he's just as you just mentioned. He Willard Richards drags John Taylor out and covers him with a mattress. He said, and then returned and dragged me along to a small cell prepared for criminals. Is what John Taylor said. Brother Richard was very troubled and exclaimed, "Oh, Brother Taylor, is it possible that they have killed both Brother Hyrum and Joseph? It cannot surely be. And yet I saw them shoot him." And elevating his hands 2 or 3 times, he exclaimed, "O Lord my God, spare thy servants." He then said, "Brother Taylor, this is a terrible event." And he dragged me further into the cell, saying, "I'm sorry I cannot do better for you." And taking an old filthy mattress, he covered me with it and said, "That may hide you, and you may yet live to tell the tale, but I expect they will kill me in a few moments." While laying in this position, I suffered the most excruciating pain. And then he goes on that Brother Richard came back and told them that they were both dead. He says he felt dull, lonely, sickening sensation at the news. I reflected on our noble chieftain, the prophet of the living God, had fallen, and that I'd seen his brother in the cold embrace of death. It seemed as though there was an eye void or vacuum in the great field of human existence to me. The kingdom, and that we were left alone. Oh, how lonely was this feeling.
Then Willard goes outside to try and get help, and he hears in the distance somebody shout, "The Mormons are coming." And that's when the mob flees because they're afraid, like you said, the militia might have been on their way. And so the mob flees. And so Willard Richards and John Taylor, this is how they managed to escape the mob.
That's right, because while they're in Carthage on that last day, Governor Ford, who's the guy that promised them safety, he actually gets out of there, leaves them all, and he actually goes to Nauvoo. So the last governor that paid more attention to them was Governor Boggs, who of course had the extermination order. So on that day, he hightails out of there. He gets out of there and just leaves Joseph completely defenseless. Although we promised him, if you come to Carthage, we will offer you security, we will offer you protection. So he leaves. So yeah, then the people just assume, okay, Ford's gone down there. That's it. The Nauvoo Legion have come back at this time. We need to get out of here because they will kill us or hold us accountable of some earthly or heavenly way.
So Willard Richard goes out and he tells people, but he also writes it down. He says, Joseph and Hyrum are dead. Taylor wounded, not very badly. I am well. The job was done in an instant. And one of the stories was about when Porter Rockwell found out. Now, Porter Rockwell was working on a ferry at the time, and he heard what had happened. So he jumped off onto a boat and rowed it to shore. They said that he was pale, and he ran through the town saying, "They have killed him. They have killed the only friend I ever had." So, Porter Rockwell, if you've ever read his story, he's such a tough guy, but this really ruined him. And he didn't go out seeking vengeance like all the stories say. He was so distraught by it. He still continued to be security for Brigham Young and all those others, but he didn't go out and just start killing. He really was really distraught about the whole situation.
Yeah, he would go to Joseph Smith III, who I think is 10, and hug him and say, your father's the only friend I've ever had. Again, must be a really, really emotional scene. And I'm imagining, like I said at the top of the episode, just riding through the town and giving people the news. People are mourning. People are very, very sad. Um, they recover the bodies. They bring them back on a wagon, and thousands of people turn up to pay tributes to the brothers. Thousands and thousands of people. Emma is weeping. What have they done? She says. Lucy, of course, his mother, is there as well, and um, it's all a very, very sad story. And the problem is, it doesn't end there.
I just want to read a little bit of section 135. I'm going to read verse 3 out of order. I'm going to read the end bit, and then I'm going to read the beginning bit. It says, he lived, speaking of Joseph Smith, he lived great, he died great in the eyes of God and his people. And like most of the Lord's anointed in ancient times, he sealed his mission and his works with his own blood. And so his brother Hyrum, in life they were not divided, and in death they were not separated. And at the beginning of verse 3, it says, Joseph Smith the prophet and seer of the Lord has done more, save Jesus only, for the salvation of men in this world than any other man that lived in it.
Well, let's end it there. I don't know how much we're going to get to talk about next week. There is so much of the history, Clive. The churches in Brigham Young isn't there. Actually, he returns later and he learns of Joseph's death, and he immediately says that the 12 are now in charge of the church. People are saying, no, Joseph told me that I was in charge of the church. And this goes on, and this is where we see multiple different fractions of the church. There's already one called the Reformed Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which was set up by some of the dissenters of the church I already mentioned during this episode. They hate Joseph, but set up their own church. It's a bit strange. But anyway, lots of people go on, and in the end, Brigham would be voted as the president of the church. But yeah, he says that the quorum, the keys are with the quorum, and it's okay. The keys are still on the earth. And there's lots of interesting stories about Joseph telling people after he first meets Brigham that one day Brigham will lead the church. Catch us on YouTube. Subscribe to us there. Catch us on Facebook. Catch us on Instagram. We'll see you next week for another episode. If you could hide to Colab podcast.